Welcome to the third episode of Zero Balancers from around the world. Let's find out who is practicing zero balancing, how they first came across it, and why they love it so much. In this video, we're going to be talking to a long-time zero balancing teacher, Richard Walters. Please introduce yourself.
So I'm Richard Walters, and I live in Devon and practice in Devon and been across into Dorset in Lyme Regis, mainly in Exeter. And I'm an acupuncturist and a zero balancing teacher and um, meditation teacher. And I work with early life trauma in a therapy called identity orientated psychotrauma therapy, a big German mouthful. Shortened to IOPT. Yeah, and I've been in practice since 1990, so that's what, 34 years of practicing zero balancing and acupuncture hand in hand, and latterly in the last 10 years studying the trauma work in depth.
How did you first come across zero balancing?
I was teaching abroad, having traveled quite a lot through my 20s, and my father suggested I was really bored with what I was doing. I eventually came to the conclusion that, with the help of my father, that looking at alternative medicine might be a good idea, which was a bit crazy for me because I was a scientist through and through with a degree in zoology, neurobiology, and all this alternative stuff was really just ridiculous to me. But my father kind of convinced me to look at that, since medicine and working in the NHS even then wasn't such a good idea in my head. I wanted to go into something in that region. And I came back to the UK and started looking at meeting a few acupuncturists, but they were all more like doctors, had that mentality, and it wasn't what I was looking for. And then my father reminded me that my neighbor from when I was a boy in Africa was now an acupuncturist. And so I gave Tim Newman a ring, and he said, "Come and see me." And I walked into his house, and it was full of art and music and cats and kind of things that were missing in my life, really. So I went to had a look at the acupuncture college he'd studied at, and kind of was drawn in.
Mm.
And he offered me a place to stay while I was settling in Oxford, preparing for the acupuncture training. And he offered me a zero balancing session. He was just completing his teacher training, I think, or just starting it. So that was September 1987, and or even earlier, because I did my first workshop very soon after that with Fritz at a place called Old Jordan's, just near Oxford. So yeah, and the rest is history. 37 years later. Huh.
So, what was your first experience of zero balancing like?
Quite terrifying, really. I hadn't been handled by a male, by a man, kindly since I could ever remember. I went to boarding school where there was beatings and there was fights and, dog eat dog world. So my experience of male touch was pretty abusive in lots of different forms. So to let my body go into another male's hands was scary to begin with. But I began to settle into it as the session progressed and began to trust. Took a long time, but something touched me. I was still very wary of it, but and very wary of alternative medicine. I remember my first week or two at acupuncture college, people were doing healing, that weird thing, and they were holding their hands over people's bodies, and it was ridiculous to me at the time. And looking back, it's like I've come quite a long way since then.
So,
Yeah, so I went off on that first workshop with Fritz, and haven't really looked back since then either.
nice. So, how would you describe zero balancing?
For me, I think when Fritz talks about touching energy and structure, simultaneously. That means our physical incarnation coming into contact with our soul and spirit. So zero balancing for me is helping people find the balance and find tuning those two together, bringing the soul spiritual vibration down into our physical bodies and helping us remember who we are with this all this overlay of human experience, trauma, emotions, shock, and the kind of illusions that are thrust on us by the world and by the media and television and expectations and school. And for me, zero balancing helps us wake up to that deeper part of ourselves, the spirit and the soul. And of course, that's done in the very simple way. We don't need to know what spirit or soul is. We just need to touch the body in a way that acknowledges the movement and freedom and flow in the body, the energy. And from that naturally comes a grounding of the energy into the bone and into the soft tissues thereafter. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. So how have you personally benefited from receiving zero balancing?
On so many levels. Um, I was a motorcycle courier in London for 3 years and had about 30 odd accidents in that time because it was my daily job. Winter, summer, ice, snow, rain, whatever, London traffic. So my body was quite battered on a physical level. And I was also quite emotionally battered and shut down from boarding school. So having what became known to me as a safe touch that could engage me and also release the shock and trauma of all those motorcycle accidents. My body, I had recurring flashbacks in zero balancing sessions that I would suddenly remember that accident or this accident or that taxi that pulled out on me that I went over the top of, or getting stuck in that ditch in the ice around Heathrow Airport. And all these things which were deeply embedded in my body were being remembered and released as I received zero balancing. And my neck freed up where it had been stuck for years. I didn't even know it was stuck. You just learn to live with it. But on a deeper level, it began to really help me find the deep stability within me in all this emotional turmoil that had been kind of the guiding and the dominance in my life began to be put second to a centered, calm place, which I see as being comes from being touched at the bone level.
Who are zero balancing workshops for?
Anyone, anyone who's interested in touch, anyone who's interested in helping people, anyone who's um, interested in their own development, interested in helping their family or their children or their parents, anybody who's already in practice as an osteopath or an acupuncturist or a massage therapist or a reflexologist, all these people who've come on my workshops over the years and studied with everyone, all the other teachers in the UK and the world, they all report getting something for themselves and for their practice from zero balancing. And I think understanding the fundamental principle of interface, that place where I end and you begin, that boundary, when we start to really experience that boundary being held for us and then us holding it for someone else, the difference is profound. Projection and transference is reduced, and we come back to who we are. We begin to realize this is me. And if we can do that for ourselves on a zero balancing workshop and then take it on and do it for other people in the world, this is me. So that all this projection about all those people out there and all those, the myriad different forms of other that we experience kind of vanishes because this is me becomes the focus. I got off on one there, sorry. I really, I think zero balancing it brings touch and a clarity of touch for anyone. So all our touch in the world can be misused and misunderstood, and we can have inappropriate touch visually or physically. And so a touch which has a boundary built into it is just magic. And so that's brilliant for therapists to understand touch at deeper level.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely. And what you mentioned about, the zero balancer holding interface and holding somebody else in that way, even if it's not physically touching, it has a profound impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it? Ashan Sumedo, a Buddhist monk, he said, um, if you can give something attention without wanting it to be different, that profound attention can have that attention can have a profound transformative effect.
Mm.
So just attention without any agenda. I had a client on the couch the other day who got off the couch and she said, I think that's the first time I've ever been handled without an agenda.
Mm.
And yeah, she was in her 50s. So that's a long time not to have safe touch.
Why did you decide to study zero balancing?
Initially, it was for me. I went along to that first workshop, and the way that people met me, and the way that people touched me, and the way that people welcomed me without judgment and without um, analysis,
Mm.
which we were all starting out. There was any, I think there were one or two people who had done a workshop, a previous workshop with Fritz, but it was the very early days. We were all starting out, and I was young. I was 27 and younger than that in myself. And to have that atmosphere generated by Dr. Fritz Smith, to have that non-judgmental, non-analytical atmosphere generated where everyone took it on board that that was the way to behave in these workshops.
Mm.
To be met in that way, to be hugged safely was profound for me. And I had to come back for more. So
Yeah.
when Fritz came back the next year, I went on another workshop with him. And then gradually the work as my acupuncture training came to completion, the zero balancing um, informed everything I did, my touch, the way I touched my acupuncture patients and the way I worked with my bodywork clients, because I'd started practicing zero balancing as well by then. And the way that people on the couch responded to zero balancing meant that I wanted to know more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
And also my own internal experience of receiving zero balancing was um, very expansive at that time. I had huge insights and huge trippy like experiences. Um, and so the need for drugs or anything else like that just seemed to melt away very quickly. Not that I'd done very much, but a bit of marijuana here. But that all, the perception changes with zero balancing substituted any need for any of that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Nice. So, if somebody's already trained in a touch-based therapy, what does zero balancing have to offer that's different?
Most therapies are either energy affecting structure, like homeopathy or healing, um, or they're structure affecting energy, like osteopathy, chiropractic. Acupuncture is a therapy which works with energy that affects structure. So most therapies either work with energy or with structure. And zero balancing is somewhat unique that it works with balancing the meeting point of those two. So if you think of the analogy of a sailing boat, you've got the wind and the sail, and we can take a little dinghy or a boat and take it into the yard and work on its structure, work on getting its beautiful planks revarnished and get the sails perfect and put it in the sea, and we've got a beautiful boat. Or we can call up a really great wind. If we're a shaman, we can do a shamanic dance or something and bring up some great wind. But if we haven't got a good boat, it doesn't work. And once the boat and the wind are both there, if there's nobody at the tiller pulling in the sails, the boat is thrown all over the place. So we can have lots of energy, lots of wind, and we can have lots of great structure, a great boat. But unless we have a meeting point of those two, somebody pulling in the sail, and at that point we're no longer being tossed by the waves, but we're flowing through our lives over this beautiful, with this great wind in our sails as we move through life. So that for me is just the magic of zero balancing. So osteopaths and chiropractics come along and find the energetics and the subtlety and the care in their touch in a new way. And the acupuncturists come in and learn a way of evaluating the physical body.
Mm. Yeah, brilliantly
And the
put.
massage therapists learn to engage energy more consciously. Yeah.
Yeah, just to tease out a little bit more out of that, what is the effect of having the energy and structure in good alignment in people? What do you see as a practitioner?
When they get off the couch, there's a springiness in their bodies and there's a brightness in their eyes and um, a vitality in their body. It's not that zero balancing generates, um, it's not that zero balancing generates energy in that way, but it frees it up. That sense of them more being embodied. So, we spend most of our lives either trying to get out of our bodies because it's too uncomfortable in our world and the demands on us are so much that we get out of it. We go off on beautiful pieces of music, or we go off on drugs, or we go shopping, always out, 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 out into the outside world, off on holiday. So this experience of seeing somebody enjoying being back in their body and feeling themselves back in themselves. Sometimes, an in-body experience can be much more profound than an out-of-body experience.
Hmm.
Yeah, sorry, did that answer your question? I went off
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
an idea. Yeah,
And in the long term, then, but maybe we will come on to that because, I'm going to ask you later about sharing zero balancing session or sessions that stand out as a good example as to what it can do for people. But I
yeah,
think a lot of people, they think of healing as like a nice thing to have, or it feels good and that sort of thing. And, people know about, being cracked and everything. But actually, the profound effect, at least to my mind, of bringing the two into balance is that, you can really um, have somebody be more engaged in their own life, and they can really kind of find their way through life and navigate their way through life. So their career, their relationships, and all that external stuff that isn't so much about what's in the treatment room, but what happens as a result of what happened in the treatment room. Anyway, now I'm going off on one.
yeah. No, I really agree because I think the question I always wanted in my life when I was younger was I don't want to be driven. I want to be in the driving seat.
Yeah.
And I think that's where zero balancing it puts us back in the driving seat of our life. It stops the pressures, the external pressures being so powerful, what our parents want of us, what society, what our school teachers, what our friends expect of us, the peer pressures, and puts us back into ourselves so that we are back in looking at what we want in our lives. And as you say, that sense of being back at the tiller of our own boat, so that we're no longer tossed around by the waves. We're actually having a fantastic sail through our lives. We're having a fantastic journey that we decide from an inner knowledge, from our heart center, from our soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Um, So, what was your first zero balancing workshop like? Although you've kind of answered that, I'm happy to skip it, but if you've got anything more to add, then please do.
When I think back to it, it was inspirational. There was something like 18 of us in the room with Fritz, and um, Fritz was demonstrating this body work and presenting lots of ideas. It wasn't a very developed form of teaching at the time. He would show us, and we'd go away, and try and make sense of what he was doing. And but the ideas that were coming through, that zero balancing, the principles that Fritz had drawn from many different traditions around the world and brought together in his book, actually, Inner Bridges, which is such a fantastic bridging of Eastern and Western science. And he was presenting these ideas. They were very new at the time. He'd just written Inner Bridges. It was just an amazing experience to see someone so enthused with weaving together so many different traditions and ideas into a unified theory, really, of body and energy. And then we'd all go to the couches and try and make sense of what we were doing and practice these moves that we call fulcrums, and the evaluations. And yeah, gradually we began to make sense of it. And it wasn't until um, a good 8 years later, when I did my teacher training, that we began to really hammer out what it did, what it was to build a fulcrum. We took Fritz's ideas and questioned him and questioned him and questioned him to get the detail of what is he actually doing? What was he doing with his hands? What was he doing with energy? What did he mean by handling energy? And what did that feel like to him? And how could we do the same? How could we explore that with him? So it was a very generative and rich time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like he was a real, well, like he created a synthesis, between that East and the West and brought it all together. And that's part of what really ignited it for you in that first workshop.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what inspired him with his osteopathic background, and then his acupuncture training, his pulling in of yogic theory from Swami Muktananda, his experience of Ida Rolf. I mean, he had so many, and Bruce Schwartz and Jack Schwartz, Brew Joy, so many different people he studied with in that melting pot of California at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So, what is it about zero balancing that has you hooked?
I really think it's where I started with you today, that it's to be in the early days, Fritz hardly talked about spirit at all, at all. He came out of the McCarthy era when anything to do with alternative medicine was communist, and anything communist was something that would get you into really serious trouble, not just a little bit of trouble, but serious. And you could lose jobs, you could lose your career. So he kept his head down and he didn't really talk much. But all the time in the early days when I was studying with him, there was this yearning in me for that connection to spirit in myself. Um, and the the pursuit of that has been, yeah, the last 37 years of my life, um, exploring how to do that for myself, exploring how to help people with my hands to reconnect to spirit. And I don't know what spirit is. I don't know what soul is, but I know it when I see it. When the room suddenly the aura in the room goes blue, or very occasionally gold seems to fill the treatment room, and I just stand back and let it do its thing because it's just exquisite. And so, what's kept me hooked is the repeated experiences of the numinous, the repeated experience of Brahma, the connections that I get in zero balancing and my clients get as well. So it's not just my delusion. Either I'm in a common delusion with all my clients, or we really are connecting with something that's there, which is what I believe, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Um, can you please share a zero balancing session or sessions that stand out as a good example of what it can do for people?
I worked out a few years back that I must have done over 10,000 zero balancing sessions, and it's more than that now. And it does so many different things for so many different people that there's a huge spread of possibility with zero balancing because it encompasses all of energy and all of structure, really. So I remember a woman phoning up from Loo in Cornwall, which is a long way away, and she had heard about zero balancing and the work I was doing, and she wanted to drive up because she'd had whiplash 7 years before and had never got over it. She'd had physios work on her, she'd had acupuncturists work on her, she'd had osteopaths and chiropractics, but somebody had mentioned me, and she was desperate and also inspired. So she came up, and there we were, the joint between the skull and the atlas. And one of the places we evaluate in zero balance is the glide, the way the skull moves on top of the neck. And when I came there, I could feel the restriction. It was restricted coming up, and as I dropped the skull back down on the relation to the neck, it just juddered. And there is this theory in zero balancing that when we have an emotional experience crossing over with a physical experience, it can get locked into the body. So we might have car accident while we're upset. So I asked her what was going on at the time of your original car accident. And she told me the story of her life and what was going on at that time. There was quite a charge in there. And this is where zero balancing can be so fantastic, because we can hold a still field that engages that locked piece, a standing wave, as it were, that's stuck. And that was stuck into this area of her neck, the shock of the car accident combined with the emotionality of her life at that point in her life. And as I held it in great stillness and focus, it gave it the opportunity just to let go. I was holding it. It didn't need to hold on to itself anymore. And she reported back a few days later that all the pain was gone. And I only ever saw her for that one session. She never came back. And we spoke about a month later, and she was still in perfect freedom in her neck, and it was gone. So on that level, I think it's great on a physical level when there's that locking in of two different fields. I had a woman come for nightmares, and again, the ability to touch somebody and bring them, nightmares are in the emotional body, and our soft tissues are so much about how we are, and our bone is about who we are. So handling her at the bone level gave her a stability in herself and gave her an anchor in her life from all this emotional stuff that was going on. And her nightmares faded away gradually over the next 10, 15 sessions. She came weekly, which is quite a commitment to come for that many sessions weekly. And she continued to come weekly for a year after that. The nightmares had ceased, but then we started moving into the emotional life work that she was doing and trying to make sense of her relationships and her existence. So I think it works really well on the emotional body. And my third thought in terms of sessions over the years, I'd just done the first Alchemy of Touch workshop with Fritz back in 1990 or something. And I went with a friend on an acupuncture. I qualified as an acupuncturist by then, but I went along with a workshop with J.R. Worsley. And we were doing this workshop down in Dartington, actually. He was down there with Judy, his wife. And I was talking to my friend about this, And she said, "Oh, I'd quite like some of that." So she lay down on the bed in her room, and I started doing zero balancing and the alchemy of touch work on her. Um, and she got off the couch and she said, "I never have had a belief in my life, but now I know there is spirit." Zero balancing had touched and given her an experience of the Great Spirit, God, Goddess, something that meant something to her on that level. And I know even now that it's there for her all these years later. It's just to do that with somebody is magical. So those three sessions, I think, sum up the physical benefits and the emotional benefits and the benefits of our spirit. They just are exquisite.
Yeah, very powerful sessions indeed. So, if people would like to work with you, where could they find you?
Um, I'm in Exeter, down in Devon, in the UK, and I'm in Newton Poppleford, which is also in Devon, and I'm in Lyme Regis, in just on the border with Dorset. Those are my locations. Exeter's my least busy. Well, I have 2 days in Exeter and 1 day in each of the other locations, and Lyme Regis I'm booked up into January, I think now. So there's not much possibility of seeing anyone there. But Exeter's still a viable option for new clients, and I see new clients there now.
Nice. And do you have an
Yeah.
online
And
presence?
do I have what?
Do you have an online presence?
Yes, I've got a website, richardwalters.org, and I'm on Instagram. Can't remember what my Instagram thing is. Richard Walters probably, um, and a bit on Facebook. But I kind of cut that out a while back. It got too addictive for me. And I teach zero balancing in Devon, and I teach it um, wherever I'm invited to go, really. I've taught it abroad. I've taught in Switzerland, and I've taught in Spain, and um, taught mini workshops in Denmark. I teach on the masterclass every year. I organise the zero balancing masterclass every year, and I've organised the last 3 UK teacher trainings. Teaching is one of my great passions. I've taught advanced motorcycling, and I've taught English as a foreign language before I became a zero balancing teacher. I love to teach. Um, so yeah, teaching. And I've written so many different workshops over the years. Um, the Zero balancing in relation to the chakras and zero balancing in relation to spirit. And I'm just resurrecting zero balancing in the field, which I taught about 15 years ago. And having recently read a really good book on plasma, interstellar plasma type plasma and solar plasma type plasma and human being plasma. Who knew that we're full of plasma? Um, Having read that book recently, I'm re-inspired to look at fields again. So that'll be a workshop I'm teaching next year and presenting pieces at the masterclass this October. Yeah, so that's a real growing thrill for me. My clients are loving it.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I really hope you enjoyed getting to know Richard. You'll find links to Richard's online presence down in the description below. And as always, if you enjoy the video, please like, comment, or subscribe to help give Richard and Zero Balancing some more exposure. Until the next time, goodbye.